Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. All praise be to the Most High God. The Most High God comes first. This stream is brought to you by L.I.V.E products. L.I.V.E, live now. We're live now, and we're streaming live right now. As you know, and from the title of the stream, you know that Superman has been a floppity flop, 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 right? That goes without saying. Also, it's not going to make Man of Steel numbers. We know this now. And basically, I want to show you fans' reaction to that. So first, let's start off with Tyron Magnus here. And I'm just going to do the topics here. So yeah, Superman will not beat Man of Steel's box office, right? That's Tyron Magnus, who's a Snyder fan, but he's also a gun fan. So, Tyrone, he tries to say that, he likes certain kinds of movies. He didn't particularly like Superman, however. And so, he thought it was a big gold heap of trash. But he's out there saying his things. As you know, Terrence Stamp, he is now dead. He played General Zod, but he played other characters in movies, and he died very recently. Joe Blow, he said, which Superman movie is actually better? Joe Blow likes both movies, but Joe Blow, in his conclusion, believes that Man of Steel is the better film. That's just his opinion. Then we have here Harsh Critics. Shout out to Harsh Critics. James Gunn fan meltdown. Snyderverse undeniable. And this is true. The Snyderverse is going to get restored. I'm going to say this to Warner Brothers one final time. You had the guy who could actually build a proper DC universe for you. But you had elements in your management, in your company, in your executive company, who were jealous of the guy and thought that he was an impediment to a Marvel DC crossover. The reason why, for those that you don't understand, DC was trying to catch up to Marvel is to do a crossover movie with them. Marvel was successful at doing an ensemble film with the Avengers. And so DC now wanted to get their ensemble film with their version of the Avengers so that they could cross over DC with Marvel. They put out this slate of movies. They had been planning this for many, many years, all the way back to 2004, all the way back to 2000. They had been trying to do crossover movies, they were trying to do ensemble movies. And there were several drafts and several directors who were supposed to do Justice League movies, and Batman v Superman was on the cards for a long time as well. So let me suffice it to say they had the director who could take them to that level, and he did what he was supposed to do. And I am not of the opinion that Batman v Superman wasn't a sequel to Man of Steel. I think that it actually was a natural sequel to Man of Steel. I have no issue with Batman v Superman and the direction in which they went. If there's any issue, it's that the studio interfered to have a shorter cut than the original movie was 3 weeks before the release of the movie. I thought that was stupid. If you're going to do any changes or shorten up a movie, then you need to do it and give the director and his crew enough time to make those changes so it will be smoother. So when I found out that it was a last minute sort of thing, I think it was about 3 weeks out from the movie being released, it was changed, and a compromise was met. That was foolish. The person who was pushing for a certain time frame on the movie because they thought it was too long was Kevin Tsuchihara. But Kevin Tsuchihara was influenced by Jeff Johns. Jeff Johns was in his ear. Jeff Johns is the snake that really started turning the executives against Zack Snyder, because Zack Snyder was bringing to the table Christopher Nolan's Zack Snyder was bringing to the table something different, the way how he directs films, as well as David Goyer was doing something different. See, you have to understand something. Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, while it was very successful, began the same time with Constantine. But the studio decided to throw Constantine under the bridge and pursue Nolan's idea of this Batman movie. So Nolan got sequels to Batman Begins. Constantine got no sequels. Nolan said that once he was doing his Batman, he'd need to be exclusively doing that. He couldn't commit to any universe or anything like that. He just wanted to tell his story. And so as a result of that, the Justice League films were aborted. There was a Justice League film that was supposed to happen in between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. But this was scrapped. I believe Frank Miller was the guy that was going to be doing that Justice League movie. But Mr. Nolan didn't want any Batman to compete with his Batman. And so that movie was scrapped. In the meantime, while that was going on, we had a series of flops. We had Superman Returns that was supposed to, have a Superman to match the Batman that was there. So they tried to revive Christopher Reeve's version of Superman and push him along with Christopher Nolan's Batman. But again, Christopher Nolan wasn't very supportive of that because Christopher Nolan was doing his own story and he was not interested in forming any kind of universe where there would be a crossover. So the studio, Superman Returns, suffered from lack of support by Christopher Nolan because they couldn't piggyback off the success of his Batman movies, which was more of a standalone trilogy that had a beginning and an end. And also, there was no way they could push towards a universe forming because that Superman would be separate from the Batman. So the story was separate. There was no crossover, nothing like that. And as a result of that, Superman Returns also suffered because it's a movie that is trying to get legs and trying to come off of previous flops with Superman franchise because the franchise was kept separate. Now, having said all that, and why am I saying this? During the run of the Batman trilogy, there were several DC films that came out. We had Superman Returns, we had Jonah Hex, we had Green Lanterns, we had Watchmen, right? And all of those films suffered. They all flopped because they were supposed to be standalone films. And they flopped. Watchmen didn't produce any money whatsoever. It was a groundbreaking accomplishment to do the movie on screen, but still, on first rated R DC film, but it flopped. Jonah Hex flopped. Green Lanterns flopped. So the attempt to get this franchise going and then try to go towards the universe. Green Lantern was supposed to be the first of a pushing the DC universe. So they tried to produce a DC universe that could, move off. They tried with Superman Returns first. Then they tried with the Green Lanterns movie in 2011 to try and push off a universe, and they failed both times. Okay? And like I said before, Warner Brothers invested in Christopher Nolan's vision, and they just threw Constantine to the curb. Constantine could have been a multi-billion-dollar business as well, because Constantine pretty much made a little bit more, actually, than Batman Begins. Those two movies could have really done something, but they never did a sequel to Constantine. Never. And Keanu Reeves wants to do a sequel to Constantine. He's been wanting to do it for a long time. There's been talks in there about it, but it has never happened. So, as a result of that, Christopher Nolan, knowing he wasn't going to create a universe after, David Goyer had an idea about revamping Superman and trying again. And so David Goyer coupled up with Christopher Nolan. They worked out the story. And then Christopher Nolan wanted several people to probably direct the movie. It ended up being Zack Snyder that was the guy that they contacted. Zack Snyder watched the script. He said, "Oh, this is interesting. All right, let me give it a shot at it." And that's how Man of Steel came to be. And Man of Steel was supposed to launch the universe, right? Warner Bros. Tried to do it twice. They tried to do it Superman Returns, and then they tried to do it in 2006, and then they tried to do it again with Green Lanterns in 2011. Those two attempts failed. And then they tried one more time with Superman. This time when they tried Superman, it launched the universe, but the critics bashed it. Man of Steel was so groundbreaking as a film. And the year before, the Avengers came out with Joss Whedon. The Avengers changed the game of comic book movies because Marvel was able to do it before DC. They were able to get an ensemble film done before DC. And it so happened it was the second billion-dollar movie. We had The Dark Knight that came out in 2008, which was the first billion-dollar comic book movie. We had The Dark Knight Rises, which came out after Avengers. So Avengers was the second billion-dollar movie. And then The Dark Knight Rises came out. That was the third billion-dollar movie. So both Warner Brothers and Disney were starting to make billion-dollar comic book movies. And so after that, they decided to launch Man of Steel. And they were hoping that Man of Steel would be another billion-dollar movie because you had producing the film Christopher Nolan, who was the guy that produced $2 billion films, David Goyer, who's the guy that wrote the Dark Knight series. So they were hoping for a start to the DCU that was grand, and it was a billion-dollar movie start, which was very unrealistic given that no franchise starter in the history of movies ever started with $1 billion, right? And then second of all, very important, the amount of hostility towards Man of Steel, given that Marvel now had this tentpole, Marvel fans started attacking it. But what we didn't know was that the studio itself was conflicted about Man of Steel, and that the studio itself was trying to sabotage Man of Steel through Jeff Johns and through several other people. Because Christopher Nolan was overseeing what Zack Snyder was doing, in the sense that Zack Snyder was bouncing off ideas with Christopher Nolan all the time, and the steps they took, David Goyer wrote into the script that Superman was supposed to snap General Zod's neck. It wasn't Zack Snyder who wrote that in. It was Christopher Nolan. And Zack Snyder had, I'm sorry, not Christopher Nolan, David Goyer. And it was up to Zack Snyder to convince Christopher Nolan that it was the right thing to do. So Zack Snyder and David Goyer tried to convince Christopher Nolan this was a good idea and this is why we're doing what we're doing. And that's why that ended up at the end of Man of Steel being what it was. And that was so radically different. I think in all the criticisms of Man of Steel, you will find people still today talking about the fact that Superman was, this murderer Superman. They called it the Murderverse because Superman snapped General Zod's neck, which, once again, is now something that people are changing their tunes. Superman just killed his clone in Superman, and apparently they give him a pass. In fact, they're saying, oh, the clone's not dead. He's going to come back as Bizarro. Okay, if you say so. But the truth be told, we saw the clone go through the black hole and everything's breaking up and he's screaming and everything, and he's dead. Okay, we saw Superman also kill the Raptors. They're saying that they fell down with their suits and they were okay. No, they died. And we saw damage from the kaiju killing people, people getting the debris smashing into buildings and knocking people away. They died, all badly injured. Okay. So I'm just saying. And then we saw Hawkgirl Frankelman commit murder. She plunged a leader to his death for no reason at all, And all I'm saying is, heroes do not kill was what was in Black Adam. And then Black Adam went on to kill people. And they've been trying their best to one-up what Zack Snyder's been doing and try to get the crowd behind him. But the crowd that's behind him don't like Zack Snyder and his films for whatever reason. And though they copy Zack Snyder relentlessly, they don't like him. And so this hater, this online hate of Zack Snyder, it's usually encapsulated in the industry. It's really the industry. This is something that's artificially generated because most DC fans love Zack Snyder. They love what he did. And who wouldn't? The people who are usually hating Zack Snyder are either the competition, which are Marvel fans, who pretend like they're DC fans, or they're actual shills in the industry hired to do a job to discredit Zack Snyder and discredit all his movies because they follow Zack Snyder even when he's not doing DC films now. They followed and they tried to discredit him with Rebel Moon. They followed him and they tried to discredit Army of the Dead. So he's not even doing DC films now, and they're still trying to discredit him, which means this is not something, this is not fans. Fans don't do that. Fans don't follow a guy and watch other movies. I never talked about James Gunn's. I never discredited James Gunn with any of his movies. I just say I don't have any taste in it. But the kind of vitriol and the kind of attack, and they're following this guy and they're attacking him all the time, that ain't normal. That's not fans. That's the industry speaking. And these people are representative of the industry. And these people don't like Zack Snyder. That's what you're seeing. And usually I think it's executives that are doing this. I think it's executives in Warner Brothers who are pretending like they're fans and trying to do these hate campaigns to dirty Zack Snyder's name. I think this is what's really going on. But to go a little further, so Man of Steel made money, and so it launched off the universe, what people call the DCEU. And we then got Batman v Superman, and the studio, because Christopher Nolan wasn't there all the time, they tampered with that movie. They tampered with BVS. They tampered with it very, very badly by cutting. They made them cut the runtime by 30 minutes, and they made them cut it 3 weeks before release, which is just ridiculous. And Man of Steel, nothing was affected, not the runtime, nothing. And it made the movie worse because there was connectivity issues, some of the best parts of the movie. There was a lot of context left out of the movie. So the theatrical run was sort of like a, I enjoyed the theatrical run when I first watched it. I'm never going to watch the theatrical run ever again because the Ultimate Edition is what I watch. And that has never seen the light of day in cinemas globally, the Ultimate Edition, which would have corrected everything. And I think a lot of people talk about the fact that the theatrical is definitely inferior to the Ultimate Edition. And some people think it's night and day. Why am I saying this? Because this universe started, it still made more money than Man of Steel, and it made more profit than Man of Steel. And then we went on to Suicide Squad, which is probably the most hated of the DC movies because even the audiences don't like it. I mean, it's a good little flick, kind of like Superman, except it's a little better than Superman, I think. And it's like a popcorn flick. You switch off your brain. Characters have a lot of characters to themselves. There's not much of a story. And but that's not David Ayer's vision. That was not what that's not his original movie. The studio literally tampered even more with the creative direction of the directors to try and force in a bright and sunny and happy thing. So the studio, once again, took David Ayer's movie from him and slashed it up with some trailer park company, and you got the shit that you got. And then we had Wonder Woman after. And by the way, that movie made a lot of profit and a lot of money. Regardless, I did enjoy myself in the theater when I watched it, but it's not something I've ever watched again. I watched it once and that was it. Wonder Woman, I've watched more than once. Watched twice, 3 times, I think. Wonder Woman is a significantly better movie, but apparently Patty Jenkins had to fight to keep certain things in. The studio was trying to get her to cut out stuff from the movie, and they did manage to change the ending. Jeff Johns was able to weasel his way into changing the ending of Wonder Woman, which would have connected to Zack Snyder's Justice League. So they did do some tampering with Wonder Woman as well, but Patty Jenkins was strong enough to keep them from really ruining that film, because they would have ruined that film. And then Zack Snyder was doing Zack Snyder Justice League. There was a lot of hype behind it, and we said it's certainly going to crack $1 billion. And then they got rid of Zack Snyder. They got him off the project because his daughter died, and they had Josh Whedon there. He redid the whole movie, and they again tampered with it, cut the runtime down, all of that, so they could get their bonuses and fuck that movie up proper. And I remember defending that fucking piece of shit. because I was thinking the company was getting attacked too much. Never defend a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Just never do that. So anyway, I realized that they fucked Zach over when I saw uh, the additional clips that they had in the DVDs and stuff that they broadcast online, and I realized, oh fuck, they really fucked this movie up. So I joined the Release the Snyder Cut campaign. They were able to get a lot of support for Aquaman, which is still a piece of shit movie, and I told people in real time that they changed that movie up, and Snyder fans still support it, and they said I was contrary, because I'd argued with Snyder fans about Justice League, and I was wrong. But then later on, dealing with Aquaman, I was on the money with Aquaman. Aquaman concept art showed us it was supposed to be a totally different movie. There was connectivity issues with the Snyder Cut once we saw the Snyder Cut. But anyway, they supported Aquaman. And in Shazam, it didn't get the support it really needed, but it still made some profit. And that was it. That Warner Bros. Had changed the tone of DC. They started with trying to change the tone with Suicide Squad. And then they really changed the tone with Justice League. And then from then on in, the tone was changed. And we got tricked with Aquaman. Shazam is a lighthearted character, so it was still darkish. And Shazam still made some money. But ultimately, in the end, they decided to chase down Marvel. They got rid of Zack Snyder. Jeff Johns was running things for a minute, and then he had to leave. And then we had Walter Hamada, and then he got kicked out. And then we had, for a brief moment in time, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And all of this time, we're only having flops for the DCEU. And then James Gunn came on, and Peter Safran, and they decided to reset the whole thing. And they said that as they came in, so that means all those other movies were dead anyway. And on top of that, the movies were generic pieces of shit. Marvel kind of pieces of shit. The storytelling was horrible. And so there was no depth like how we had with Man of Steel, with BVS, with Wonder Woman. There was no depth. Anyway, we finally got the Snyder Cut in between that somehow, but they never put the Snyder Cut out in the cinemas. Now, all of this is important to what I'm going to say next. And then they reset the universe. They kicked out the CW. They put in Gunn's storylines and hosted a hee hee ha ha, just a lot of laughs. They call it fun because it's funny. And everything just kept on flopping. So here we are today. Superman is yet another flop. And we wonder, why did you even change the universe, right? Because Warner Bros. Has had a history of not being successful at launching a DC universe. Their first success was with Zack Snyder. And what did they do? Oh, it wasn't good enough. So get rid of Zack Snyder. You're not going to find another Zack Snyder, Warner Brothers. You're just not going to find him. There's nobody who can launch a universe right now who has the propensity, skill, and ability that Zack Snyder has. You've tried with Jeff Johns with Superman Returns. You failed. You tried with Jeff Johns again with Green Lanterns. You failed. You tried with Zack Snyder, Christopher Nolan, and David Goyer, and you succeeded. And even though you have growing pains, if you look, as the movie successfully continued onwards, you had Man of Steel. Okay, the critical response wasn't so great. The audience liked it. Then you had BVS. This was the toughest one. This is the one where they were very critical of it, but the audience still liked it. Then you had Suicide Squad, which was the worst of them all, where the critical rating was horrible and the audience hated it. Okay? You can go on Rotten Tomatoes and watch what I'm saying. It's true. But after that, you had Wonder Woman, where the critics liked it, the audience liked it. It made a lot of money. All of those. So you had a profitable Suicide Squad. Increasingly, you had more profit until Justice League, right? Then you had Justice League, where the critics hated that as well. The audience hated that as well. And then you get on to Aquaman, where the audience liked it, the critics liked it, and they made a ton of money. So if you kept along the lines of this universe, if you kept along the lines of what Zack Snyder was doing, you'd have made more and more money. Because you would have had people who love what Zack Snyder's doing. Plus, you would have other people who are getting accustomed to the style that he was bringing. The problem is when you bring something new, people don't know how to react to it. In terms of the critics, they're measuring this up with Marvel, which is unfair, but it is what it is. So the critics were like, this is not Marvel. Man of Steel is not Marvel. And it's too realistic. And so they called it dark, grim, and lacking fun, which is stupid. I mean, Blade is not, you saying Blade is dark, grim, and not lacking fun? I mean, I don't understand. You had so many comic book movies. Spider-Man, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2. Is that dark, grim, and not lacking fun as well? I don't get it. So anyway, continuing onwards. So this studio got rid of the only person and director who actually got the studio making money. And then over time, people got used to what it was and they were getting the critical ratings and everything else that was coming with it. So instead, the studio changed course. And when it changed course, that's when the fan base who liked what the studio was doing before and was getting accustomed to it, they got turned off and they decided, oh, this is generic shit. There's nothing in this for me. And they just left. And that's what has happened with Superman. It's more of the same that they're doing. And it's maybe a popcorn flick, but it's unmemorable. You won't remember it. So, Movies TV Mad, who's another fan, and he's also in the industry. And he's not necessarily a Snyder fan, but he likes Man of Steel. He thought BVS was terrible. He said Superman was never going to beat Man of Steel at the global box office. The Renaissance Nerd, again, not a Snyder fan. Superman 2025 is clearly a super flop despite propaganda. So these people saw through the shit that they're doing. CS, the director, however, is a Snyder fan. And he said Man of Steel and the Snyderverse for the win. Views with Hughes culture. He said James Gunn's face massive backlash over shucking Superman. And he's actually a Gunn fan, but he has to report this news. And is a backlash because James Gunn in his DVD or in his digital release with the behind the scenes stuff shows that he alters the ending where Jor-El and Laura Van, they're not telling Superman to conquer the earth and stuff. They're being more conventional. So James Gunn decided to put in the less conventional version, which is controversial. Woke Watch says James Gunn meltdown after Superman collapse. After Superman fails to break even. Harsh Critic says epic Snyder fans avoid Gunn's Superman while it's closed. Mr. Phenom, who both Harsh Critics and Mr. Phenom are Snyder fans. James Gunn's Superman will not beat Man of Steel at the box office. That was according to Variety. Yeah. So, and then James Gunn's Superman joins top 5 grossing films at DC. That's not true. That's also false because the Joker has to be inside of there. And he's talking about at the domestic level. Mr. Phenom also said that Zack Snyder's movies only make sense if you switch on your brain. Some people don't. Aaron Fisher, a couple months before, said that they did it. Superman's a comedy with some serious moments. Same Aaron Fisher, he's also a Snyder fan. Warner Brothers has destroyed the DC brand. And he talks about absolute Superman, absolute Wonder Woman, absolute Batman. They're actually hurting DC Comics because the other runs are not good. And so the majority of sales are in the absolute brand and not in the conventional brand. The Big Lie and Constant Excuses. James Gunn's Superman digital date announced and 800 million. Okay, so the 4KO, who's another, he likes Zack Snyder, but he kind of basically likes movies. He sees different trends. He likes Marvel as well. The Angry Badger says James Gunn doesn't get Superman. Here's proof. And James Gunn's Superman, a DC Studios disaster. This is the one I told you guys you could go watch, and you can go watch because So Superman currently actually has earned a little bit less than they projected. They projected 595 million. It's roughly that, but worldwide it's 594.59 million dollars. Okay, which is it's got a ways before it gets to the $600 million mark. It may do it this week. I don't know. Maybe this weekend. Maybe we'll see. But it's taking a mighty long time to do so. Right? It's at 341 million domestic, 254 roughly international. So we're going to talk a little bit about SuperFlop in terms of going onto a DC site on Facebook. Okay. Just gonna fuck me over there. That's all right. So Robert Cal in Comics and Superheroes, this is a general DC, Marvel, whatever, put up this post on August 1. It's not even close. Superman returns. Hashtag Superflop. Not convinced that Man of Steel is more profitable? Let's analyze the number of movie tickets, which translates to people in movie theater occupying a seat. Okay. The domestic box office for Superman at the time that they did this was 289,502,000, which equals to 22.3 million tickets sold. Superman Returns. Its domestic box office was 2,081, 200 million and 81,192. The tickets sold was 30.5 million, which is way more than Superman. And then Man of Steel, at that same point in time, the domestic box office sold was 36.4 million tickets. So, Superman's underperforming. It's not even performing as well as Superman Returns, far less Man of Steel. So domestically, even though they say the domestic box office is bigger than Man of Steel, it ain't selling as much tickets as Man of Steel. It's a very important point. And shout out to Robert Cal for stating that.
Stop back for me when everyone else is off.
Okay. Ooh. Okay. All right. So that's a place where you can have Facebook, Marvel, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Yeah, so Man of Steel is still ahead at the end of this weekend, and also Superman has not so far crossed $600 million. Maybe at the end of this week it will. Who knows? Right? So this is my title holding thing showing Guntz worshiping Superman, but the economy it's going down. DC Super Slop with James Gunn. So incoming Super Flop. So we had James Gunn doing Guardians of the Galaxy. We have Superman. We have what you call him, Black Adam, and they all fly the same. Their hands at the side, and they're saying incoming Super Flop. All right, now we're gonna go to Twitter. Oh, let me go to Vero first. Okay, we go to Vero. This is Jacob Torres's. What the hell? What the fuck is? What the hell's wrong with Vero? Okay, we go home. All right, so here we are. Okay, so my post was WB can make over $1 billion if they simply do this below. When we say Zack Snyder's Justice League, we're talking part one and part two. We're splitting the 4-hour film into two-hour parts, not the film and its sequel. Simple. The part one can be done in the morning and part two in the afternoon. So you have like you do in the morning the 2-hour part one version, and then in the afternoon you do part two. You know, and there's a suggestion there that you can do on for this year or next year, and that's how you can kind of launch off Restore the Snyder. Sean O'Connell says, last laugh in this summer's Superman battle. It seems as though the Snyder fans are having the last laugh. That's what he's saying. It's that moment, the defeat for this reboot, Restore the Snyderverse or no money. By Sean O'Connell. Like I said, it's inevitable that Snyder fans getting the last laugh in this summer's Superman battle. That's by Sean O'Connell, South Cali guy, 87. You know, put it up there. I think I liked it. Did I? Yeah. So it's kind of official that now who did this? Alexander says, is this a Superman movie or a Homelander movie? That's what I'm saying, bro. That's what I'm saying. Edgelord Gunn, sad. That's what I'm saying, bro. Now, who's the loud minority at James Gunn? Over the weekend, Superman added 3.1 million overseas, 8.4 million globally. At this point, even with an impressive gross of 595 million, Superman is unlikely to surpass the haul of the character's last solo outing in 2003's Man of Steel, which flew to $670 million. There it is, DC Comics. Yeah, it's not going to make those numbers, and it's not going to break even, no matter what James Gunn says. So it is what it is. Hey, look at this. Jacob Torres says, make the Batfleck movie, restore the Snyderverse, support the Batman for AFSP, that is the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and Feeding America. So when you buy a shirt, you are doing that. So the campaign continues now with shirts. I hope you guys purchase one. You go to customink.com. That's inked for the people. For those of you who don't know. And I saw Cali guy sending a message to Warner Brothers and James Gunn, DC Fisher said, I want you to remember, in all the years to come, in your most private moments, I want you to remember my hand at your throat. I want you to remember the one man who beat you. Yes, there it is. Variety article again. All right, so that's Vero. Yeah, advertising the shirt here. We have relaunched the Batman shirt campaign once again. This time we team up with Custom Inc. Shout out to Stead Motos once again for creating this amazing design. We also added Make the Batfleck movie to the back of the shirt. Read more. So they're still campaigning for Restore the Snyderverse, which is great. The shirts will print as soon as the minimum goal of 10 shirts are sold. Get your shirt today and help raise funds for AFSP and Feeding America. Click on the link here. All right, so if you guys are on Vero, you should check this out. It's really cool, and that's the Batfleck movie. All right, let's go to Twitter.